This next session, it's going to deal with the topic addressing extremism and nuclear risks in South Asia. Paolo Cotta-Ramusino is going to give a very in-depth discussion about the topic, and he will discuss also some of the issues that have come up through a series of very important dialogues that Pugwash has been conducting on the future of Afghanistan. I should just say before we launch into this that these dialogues, we have been told, some think may be as important as anything that Pugwash might have done during the Cold War. This is it's a emerging and continuing project, and it's been an honor to work with an organization working on these issues. Paolo is certainly a leader in the field. Paolo, if you want to introduce yourself, as the others had a chance, please feel free.
Well, I am by profession a mathematical physicist dealing with the differential geometry of quantum field theory. That's it. Now I deal with Islamic radicalism. So what is the connection between the two? I don't know. But anyway, life is changing, so we have to adjust. I've been Secretary General for some time, and it's been a very interesting job, sometime in 2002, and the field is changing all the time, so it's not something weird. There is certainly no risk of being bored. Let's go back. I want to organize this quick introduction in this way. First of all, we start with nuclear weapons. So let's try to summarize briefly what are the risks for nuclear weapons to be used again. It's the 60th anniversary of the Russia Alliance Manifesto, the 20th anniversary of Pugwash. We must start with nuclear weapons. I think nuclear weapons can be used again by mistake. That's something which is generally not considered so bad, but it exists. There has been example where nuclear weapons there have been false alarms. There have been some of nuclear weapons are on a permanent alarm state, so they can at some point, by wrong decision, can be used. Then I would say it's a quick list. I would like to go on the issue of the collapse of the non-proliferation. You see, non-proliferation is a very delicate system. We have the Non-Proliferation Treaty, which is certainly the biggest treaty in terms of country or membership of the country, but there are problems there. First of all, we are too much witnessing in the after the review conference, which happens every 5 years, that there is either no conclusion or the conclusions that are taken are not implemented. So there is a really serious problem of credibility of the NPT. Plus, we had in the past discussion about Iran, we had some idea at some point that maybe a member state, a non-member of the NPT like Israel, could have been decided to attack nuclear facilities inside Iran, since he was concerned about, Israel was concerned about the possibility of Iran developing nuclear weapons. You see, this would have been a disaster in terms of, first of all, of the credibility of the NPT. Second, would have prompted Iran to get out of the NPT, since you see the facility which are supposedly to be for peaceful purposes to be attacked by another state, which is not only in itself very critical, but is also forbidden explicitly by the resolution approved by the International Atomic Energy Assembly in, I think, 1997. So, to attack nuclear facilities either on construction or functioning, since there are consequences, extreme consequences in terms of risk, economic risk, and so on. So we have been the joint plan of action, which has been described before, has been certainly a positive step, but I think we should not be relaxed on that. There are other possibilities of bad developments. I think that, in fact, in the Middle East, where we have this kind of tension between Iran and Saudi Arabia, which is underlying, then you can expect that at some point the nuclear, so to say, the nuclear attraction for, the attraction for nuclear weapons could resurge again. And there's been with very serious concern that I heard that, for instance, the United Arab Emirates is talking about starting a process of uranium enrichment, which is, it's just a political message. Then I think has been mentioned in the past quite extensively the possibility of a terrorist attack. The possibility that terrorists will acquire nuclear weapons and use nuclear weapons for terrorist purposes. This is something which has been under control for some time. The data that we have about smuggling of fissile material, I'm not talking about just radioactive material, I'm talking about fissile material, it's very limited. So this is something which is positive in that sense. Then you see, in the main period of the Cold War, we had the main risk was associated with the fact that you had at some point a conflict originated somewhere that would evolve into nuclear one. During the Cold War, there is constantly the possibility of Soviet Union, invading Germany, the Fulda Gap. I don't know whether you remember all this terminology, and then the reaction of the West with tactical nuclear weapons, and then an exchange that will blow up from there. We had been seeing the Cuban Missile Crisis, which has been a very serious problem and showed that there is an intrinsic weakness in all the divides that people can think in terms of understanding exactly where the situation is going. In the Cuban Missile Crisis, we had a series of miscalculation, wrong information, decision taken without really thinking about. And it's just by luck that we got away from it. Now, I think the problem of conflicts is not so much in terms of Russia and the West facing each other in terms of military confrontation. There is always this problem, as has been reminded recently by Putin, who mentioned that after all, Russia has nuclear weapons, and with the relatively small accident between Russia and Turkey is a part of NATO, so we had a little bit of a taste of some serious problem that could evolve out of it. But I would say this is not certainly the biggest problem in terms of risk of nuclear weapons being used after conflicts. I think that the situation which is, to me, the most critical one is a situation between India and Pakistan. And the two countries have enough nuclear weapons to create an enormous damage, around 100 each. And the situation is getting complicated in the region since there is basically a mistrust, a reciprocal mistrust, especially a very strong mistrust of India towards Pakistan. There is a situation of extremism and radical group which are moving inside the region, and they are essentially, there is quite a serious list of critical radical movement in Pakistan. And I would say, since then we want to connect the issue of ISIS, Daesh, however you want to call it, there is a growing interest, I would say, from this group for Daesh. I think we have to interpret this clearly. It's not the desire. I'm not saying that the extremist movement in Pakistan are controlled by Raqqa or controlled by Mosul. It's not that there is an organizational structure, but there is an ideology. Someone was mentioning before the ideology as an issue. I think it is an important one to be considered. that there is a sense that maybe this this new model of so to say of carrying on a war against the West is something that can be spread. The model of ISIS in this respect, I've seen that essentially from the side of that part of the world, is a model we say, well, we can create a conflict, we can create a big mess, and then with this big mess, we can in fact start evolving a global confrontation that eventually may lead to our ideology to win over the others. If you look at the consequences of the Paris attack or the attack against the Russian plane, or even the smaller attack that we are witnessing in the United States, they are somehow mentioned as possible attacks carried on by people affiliated one way or the other one with ISIS. I'm not saying that this is something which is true, but the perception is this. So we have a climate now where, in fact, there is a very high tension on this issue with objectively a limited series of events. We're not talking about, when people, I was surprised that President Hollande was mentioning that something like that we are in the Third World War. See, World War II had, over the period of 6 years, an average of 35,000 people killed every day. That's a different order of magnitude with respect to 128 people killed in Paris. We have to remember that numbers matter. That's what I learned from physics. So it's order of magnitude that is something which is very important. And when people talk about, exaggerate about World War III or a global conflict, we are all at war. Well, come on, this is just playing into the hands of the people that want to create a problem. They want to say, aha, you see, we have even mobilized the United States. So this huge reaction, which are done for the purpose of calming the internal public opinion, say of France, of Russia, or United States, are in fact playing into the desire of the Daesh people. They want to create this big trouble, and they are convinced that by creating some troubles here and there, they are able to create a general conflict, a global conflict. And if you see this from this perspective, you see that the relation between India and Pakistan is objectively the situation where they can have more effect. And I want to make this example, hoping that will never be considered as it will never happen, but anyway, we have to be careful about. You see, I would say in Pakistan there is a lot of radical groups. In the past, the radical groups have been used and stimulated even by the Pakistani government to carry on the battle around Kashmir. But I would say that one has the wrong impression at this point that Pakistan is under control of I would not say the plurality, but at least the majority of the radical groups which are inside Pakistan. I don't think this is true. Knowing the situation there, I am deeply convinced that yes, maybe something is known, but it's not. There is no such a thing as a direction inside Pakistan, inside Pakistani military structure, even the secret services, of these small groups. Otherwise, you cannot explain why, in fact, Pakistan is not only a source of a place where extremist groups live, but is also the target of several terrorist attacks. I mean, the Pakistan, you have many people killed. I don't remember how many thousand people have been killed, but certainly many more than in many other countries. So if Pakistani structure would be able to control things, they would first of all avoid internal terrorist attack. The terrorist situation, the extremist group in Pakistan is something which is a source of concern. On the model of ISIS, it's not only a fight against the West, but it's also a fight, it's a sectarian fight. When the Lashkar-e Jhangvi stopped at some point a bus in the western part of Pakistan, decided that the Sunni were on one side and the Shia were on the other side, and they killed all the Shia. This is sectarian attitude, which is, of course, exactly playing into the same style of ISIS. Then we get to the Afghanistan, so it's also an example. So at some point you can imagine very well that you have groups inside Pakistan. They're influenced by ISIS ideology. I don't want to get into too specific. But they can at some point to make the Big Bang. They say they can organize a group going into India and creating maybe Mumbai Plus, and a terrorist attack which is like the Mumbai attack, maybe more. And you don't need too many people. You don't need too many people to do this. Then what happens is that if there is such attack, the Indians will be convinced, as things are now, that Pakistani armed forces or Pakistani secret services are behind this attack. It's part of the current ideology. The main philosophy there is this one. So there is something which is evolving into India's strategy, which is called at times cold start or something like this. Let's say that they are going to react by making a conventional attack against Pakistan by either hitting some specific targets or taking a part of the territory as a retaliation for a possible attack. At some point, as we heard from our conversation that we had in Nagasaki with some very well-known expert of Pakistani nuclear weapons, Pakistan is sort of considering a strategy that will say, well, we're going to use tactical nuclear weapons if we have a conventional attack. The idea is that they're saying this for the purpose of deter a conventional attack, as much as the idea of a possible conventional attack from the India perspective is something that would be deter the Pakistani government to support a terrorist attack inside India. The question with this complex reciprocal deterrence is that there is a series of casual factors that are not taken into consideration. And in fact, there is a basic casual factor that nobody is really under full control of what's happening. So you can imagine that, well, after any use of nuclear weapons, whatever, then you will have a retaliation, then you will have a big effect in terms of not only of people, that's of course, but also on the economy, on the structure of the society, ecological, you can imagine. So at some point when this will happen, if this will happen, let's hope never, but then you will have the perspective about nuclear weapons will be totally different. Of course, it's very hard to predict what can happen, but certainly you can imagine that the non-proliferation regime that we are thinking about will be totally shaken. And many countries will decide that they have to think on their own, and then at some point, things can change. So the landscape can seriously change. So what I'm saying is this, that there is on the perspective, a critical interaction between nuclear weapons conflicts and on the other side, extremist movements or radical movements. I don't want to be misunderstood. I'm not saying that all radical movements are in the same category. In fact, one critical thing is to understand that there are radical movements that have a very different agenda. They have a local agenda, a regional agenda. Let's make an example. Hamas or the Muslim Brotherhood are certainly radical Islamic movement. There are others. But they have a regional, a local agenda. They are essentially, they operate on the basis of their own constituency. Their own constituencies are the people of Gaza, maybe, which they have all the right to do something, I mean. But, the Talibans are also something which is local regional, even though they make terrorist attacks. Their own purpose is to get back into the political system of Afghanistan. When we dealt with Afghanistan, with the Taliban, I met them several times. The first thing that they were telling me, and that's where I understood that it was a different perspective, was we hate Daesh. And it's not just for the fact of a competition, but is for the fact that it's something which is alien from, that's what they said, to Afghan projects, to something which has to do with Afghanistan. I'm not making the judgment that the Taliban necessarily or anybody else is having the right ideas about Afghanistan. It's not for me to judge this. The point is that there is a difference between a general, if you're on the global agenda, creating a big mess worldwide, and the local agenda, which is defending the population or a part of it, or defending some specific interest which has to do with some specific region. And, well, the borders are fuzzy, I understand. Someone from movement that can shift from one position to the other one. But at least is a sort of kind of distinction that we should keep in mind. And what I'm saying is that at the end of the day, talking with the groups which have a local agenda, in principle is something which is, I would say, less difficult than talking with the other groups. And that's what we did in Afghanistan, even though, you see, in this situation, putting together the Taliban and other groups are something which is not easy. Then the Taliban themselves split. They fought against themselves. There are many people who have been killed for internal fight. Now the Taliban are divided into 3 groups. And they fight among themselves and also fight against the guys which have used Daesh as a reference. I mean, there is a region, in particular in the province of Nangarhar in Afghanistan, which is on the border with Pakistan, where there has been intense fight with 100 people, 1,000 people killed between the Taliban and groups which are call themselves as affiliated to ISIS, to Daesh. But then there has been also fight inside the Taliban, so it's a mess. When we are talking about dialogue in this situation, we are not talking about people which are sitting in front of a cup of tea and say, okay, what do you want to have, a cake of a cookie? I mean, it's different. The problem is a little bit more difficult, so one has to understand that when you deal with this kind of communication and dialogue, we are dealing with brutality, which is, of course, on both sides, on all sides. So, but what I'm saying is that there is a difference between something which can be handled if you have a local agenda, if the groups have a local agenda, and it's totally different if the party have a global, if you want, now I would say eschatological agenda where you can create a big destruction. And I want to also to say that and then I want to conclude this about the if you want the global agenda, which is to say that some groups have of creating a fracture with the rest of the world. It's something which is certainly enhanced by the present system of communication. You see, when you have immediate information, when you have immediate reaction, when countries are forced to act immediately on the basis of some accident, then the rhetoric escalates spontaneously. And when the rhetoric escalates, you have more people that are attracted by this. If there are over 100 people, say, 95 or maybe 97 are appalled by what happened in Paris, or what happened in Syria, by the way, 200,000, 220,000, 30,000 people killed. But then there are 3 people who are saying, no, that's the right way to do it. And unfortunately, these 3 people, these 5 people, which are this small percentage, is able to do a terrible attack, a terrible act. They can really change a little bit our landscape. And the example of India, the relation between India and Pakistan, is an example that I would be, in a sense, it's to me is the extreme example where something can be organized by small groups, but this should be considered as a serious example and not just something that is theoretically possible. Conclusion. I would say that there are different things. I would say that in the West there is a basic recommendation in order not to have this conflict with the radical Islam to escalate beyond control. There is one obvious argument, which is, well, you don't want to identify Islam in general with the terrorists or the extremists. That's obvious. I mean, this is something that I don't need to repeat in this environment. There are people that need to be also taught this, but that's another thing. But my second point is that one should not put all the radical Islamic movement in the same basket. I think that the elimination of the Muslim Brotherhood in Egypt has been, all in all, a big mistake. It created a situation where the Muslim Brotherhood, in fact, fed into the underground opposition that was not absolutely necessary. I think that defining Hamas a terrorist organization is a mistake, in the sense that it's part of the use of term terrorist for defining anybody that you don't like, and this is something which is just put everything on the same in the same. I mean, we have a sea where everything is equal, which is not the case. Hamas can make mistakes, can make terrorist attacks, but they are more or less representing a part of the population of Palestinians which have been under serious attack. And they've been, in fact, the last war left 2,200 people killed. I think that while facing something like 3, 4, 20, 40 Israeli which have been killed, there is a big difference in order of magnitude. And one has to understand. So putting everybody in the same category will mean that you are not able to distinguish anymore, and you mean that you are essentially feeding into the system that will enhance the capability of Daesh-type groups. Thank you so much.
Okay, thank you very much, Paolo. It's a real treat to have a chance to hear the Pugwash Secretary General actually give the full explanation and the background behind why Pugwash's agenda includes the kinds of topics that we're discussing today, because it is a very reasoned and very forward-looking approach. And as I said earlier, it's an honor to be able to be associated with this sort of work at this time. In a logistical comment first, we are going to start Dr. Al-Sharastani's address promptly at 12:30, so that's in 10 minutes from now. As I mentioned earlier, we did not schedule in coffee breaks because we are being webcast live, so if anybody needs to or would like to get up and stretch their legs or go, I think there may be coffee out there, I'm not sure at this point, but please feel free. We have a few minutes for some very brief thoughts right now. I'm sure Paolo would be willing to answer any questions, but I am going to have to very firmly cut us off at about 12:28 so that we have time to switch over. Does anybody have any? We have Joey. Do we have a microphone? Oh.
There we go.
Christopher Watson again. A quick question to Paolo. It's always very difficult when talking about second track negotiations to know what you can say and what you can't say in public. Mm-hmm. And your talk today was a good example of that problem. And looking at it from outside, people who very much want to know what Pugwash is really up to, really want to hear all these details about how it all works, which we certainly don't hear about at the time, and perhaps we only hear about in the memoirs of negotiators 20 years later. Is there anything we can do in the meantime to bridge that gulf?
Well, I think that what is important is to get the main sense. I mean, when we have talks, especially in this environment, there are lots of people that you approach separated and don't want to be mentioned. I mean, this is. Then there are lots of concern by others. There are some people that would say, "Well, I don't want to. I can support you, but I don't want to say that." I mean, it just.
Although maybe in the interest of time, can we take a couple more questions?
Sure. I just wanted to answer to that. Yes.
General comment. Please stand up.
David Howell again. I found the Secretary General's tour of the scene fascinating, but you were really touring a nightmare. And the nightmare, of course, is that nuclear weapons and all the problems that they've raised, which Pugwash looks at, could fall into the hands of the non-state, the new hybrid warfare world, the non-state actors, the empowered groups, who can be quite small, but as a result of micro-technology of weapons, can exert appalling damage and cause appalling loss of life. So that's really the great nightmare of all, that nuclear weapons fall into hands of people who don't operate as states, don't have the values of states, aren't interested in it. Now, across that, and this is where the new agenda emerges, we have the phenomenon of Daesh, which says it is a state. It's a state which hates states. It's a state which deliberately spreads itself across states, and indeed spreads not merely Syria and Iraq, but as we discovered rather belatedly, you can watch the Foreign Office here discover it this week, the cancer has suddenly broken out in Libya. And next, where will the cancer break out next? And are these things connected? And what are they connected by? Is it cyber control and franchise information through the information network? Or is there actually command and control from Raqqa on this? But here we have a non-state proclaiming itself as a state. And of course, sooner or later, the really hideous aspect of the nightmare that the Secretary General described is the one that could be unite nuclear weapons technology put it into the hands of this non-state state. And I just wondered, Secretary General, how you know, where we go on that. And an additional precise question, do you feel there's any encouragement, do you draw any encouragement from the Saudi Arabian announcement of a creation of an Islamic military union? Alas, it's kind of predominantly a Sunni union, but nevertheless covering 34 states, who at last have said, well, we can't just sit here. Terrorism is going to destroy us all, and we must organize regionally and locally and sensibly to have a united front against Daesh. So two related questions, but arising from your fascinating comments.
Okay, I'd like to just remind everybody we have an opportunity later this afternoon to go into more depth about all of these issues. After the webcast ends, we'll have an additional time together. So for right now, Paolo, if you could just give a couple
Sure.
moments, and then we're going to have to switch over the sessions that were ready at 12:30. Sorry to anybody who might have also
Well,
wanted to comment or.
Well, the question that Lord Owen presented is a very important one, I would say. So it's worth to make, first of all, the difference between Al-Qaeda and Daesh is Daesh as a territory which attracts people. And there is I'm not saying it's easy to go there, but what I'm saying is that there is a big difference between Al-Qaeda, which has a general ideology of creating trouble, so to say, and Daesh is as a territory. So it's in between a state and a non-state. In terms of the capability, I think I see very much their experience in terms of propaganda and capability of interacting with the present way of communication is going around. I don't see so much the role, their capability in terms of cyber attacks, but I would say that the lead, since you are very much concerned, and I am too, about cyber problems, I think the lead on this has been taken by Israel and by the US. With the Stuxnet, they decided to develop cyber means of disrupting functioning of specific items. They were nuclear civilian facility, they can be in the future airplanes, they can be in the future nuclear weapons, they can be in the future trains, whatever it is. So there is this big risk. The lead in that way is not taken by the extremists, it's taken by the, so to say, the technologically sophisticated company. Then this information can go to them later on. But at the beginning, it's very important that we stop this kind of study of cyber means of destruction inside the most technologically sophisticated country. Otherwise, we are going to not control the situation. Then finally, in terms of Saudi Arabia, who was saying Saudi Arabia is a difficult country. There are many things there that are source of concern. I mean, in the sense that it's obvious that Saudi Arabia money is going around someplace, not necessarily the state, but maybe the people which have some money. And there is, as was mentioned by a Saudi colleague in a meeting that we had recently, there is an objective sympathy for Daesh inside Saudi Arabia, which is not a minor statement, and I think that, so I'm referring from some Saudi, and I think that this is something which should be a source of concern, and in fact shows that inside Saudi Arabia there is I would say, the need of talking with them and addressing this issue, and try to understand who can really reproduce this discussion at a higher level, and this is not easy to understand.
Okay, please join with me in thanking Paolo for the excellent presentation.